Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. Republicans have long criticized Democrats' propensity to play identity politics, ranging from party rules requiring ethnic and gender parity in its party apparatus to overt candidate appeals to vote for someone who looks like them. This year, Republicans have discovered the identity card, playing it hard and somewhat clumsily in Senator John McCain's nomination of Alaskan Governor Sarah Palin for vice president. Palin and Republican operatives have been making bald-faced appeals to Hillary Clinton supporters to come on over and break that glass ceiling that Senator Barack Obama denied the New York senator from breaking on her own. Forget about the fact that Clinton and Palin disagree on foreign policy, abortion, the Bush tax cuts, health care, how to deal with the energy crisis, and the role of religion in the public square. Palin is a woman by God, and that ought to be enough. Democrats questioning Palin's experience, how she deals with congressional earmarks, whether she pressured the state police director to fire her ex-brother-in-law, and whether she pressured the librarian in the town of Wasilla to ban books, find themselves attacked as sexist bullies. Meanwhile, Republican operatives spend some time attacking Obama as a community organizer, which some, including me, see as a thinly veiled attempt to focus on Obama's race. For his part, Obama's campaign seems to be highlighting McCain's advanced age by pointing out he is not very computer literate and that he, quote, just doesn't get it. The fact is, the next president will deal with the collapse of the credit markets that has seen the most wrenching Wall Street shakeout since the Great Depression. As Wall Street woes spill onto Main Street, as wars in Iraq and Afghanistan reach critical phases, as crises in housing and healthcare reach greater levels, will an identity-dominated campaign give short shrift to broader policy concerns? We're joined by four New Yorkers who take part in that debate, trying to figure out what it all means. Joseph Mercurio is the founder of National Political Services, a political consulting firm that has worked both national and local campaigns. Kevin Mordali is a veteran Democratic activist in the city, working for Bill Lynch Associates. Robert George is an editorial writer for the New York Post, and Susan Del Percio is a partner in the Republican-oriented political consulting firm of O'Reilly Strategic. Joe, let me start with you. As the guy who does polling and stuff like that, I guess Palin is the one who kind of focused on identity politics. In the beginning, it seemed to be a boost. Is it playing out that way?
Not really. It's the excitement of it initially, the surprise of it initially helped McCain, but I think it's largely faded. People are now looking at the economic questions, but before the economic issues broke on Sunday and Monday, Obama had already closed 8 points of the post-convention bounce and the Palin post-convention bounce. So I think it was already going away, and now with the economic crisis dominating the political environment, I think it's pretty much finished with.
I'm going to do a little devil's advocate. I'm going to let you take a shot at Obama and you take a shot at McCain.
Well,
do you think that the Obama campaign is playing the age card against McCain?
clearly they are, and that's something that's been discussed for a long time, and it's been happening for 18 months, you know, just in general when they were going after Republicans and they picked different issues they wanted to, and when McCain became the nominee, that became their issue. They want to make him two things, out of touch and associate him with George Bush. The problem is it's not working. He's actually, now you have Obama dealing with Sarah Palin, which is I don't understand how they can end up in that situation, because until a couple of days ago, that was dominating, and it makes John McCain look so much more leadership-oriented. And now that we're getting into a case where things are looking extremely bad, that's when people elect Republicans.
The community organizer, I mean, obviously I've said I thought that was kind of thinly veiled racial appeals. Is that what was going on in your mind?
Well, first, let me say a quick, undercut shot at John McCain. I don't think the Democrats have to work too hard to make someone who said they don't know much about the economy and couldn't send an email himself that much out of touch. I think he did that for us. Second, I think Susan is absolutely right. I think the fact that we were even focusing on Sarah Palin was a mistake on our part. How many times can you mention George Bush mentioning Joe Lieberman's name a couple years ago? I think every moment we spend on Sarah Palin, we don't focus on John McCain, and we lose this election. So I think the community organizer thing was a little bit about race. but I think it was more about the fact that they don't value the hard work that folks that care about public service and care about the people in this country who are suffering the most by this economic crisis.
I'm sorry, I just have to say
And
that
that's
John
just my
McCain doesn't
opinion
care
about-
about public service is just really stretching it
Well,
a bit
no, I'm
much.
talking about those who do public service on a level with the folks that they care about. John McCain, we value his service, as I think Barack Obama has said a million times, but he's not interested in feeding the homeless. He's not interested in, I mean, his tax cuts are worse for folks of color than they are for anybody else in this country. So I don't think community service as an organizer is valued by people like John McCain. Military service clearly is, and that has its place, but I think both things have its place in the public conundrum.
Well, as a Catholic West Indian Black Republican male, don't think I didn't notice that you came to me last. You know, I'm feeling very put out by this.
It's because you're a Catholic.
Well, I thought so.
Well, actually, it came to me first.
You went to the white people and then the Democrat first. I didn't know that. No, but seriously.
We
First,
are playing identity politics.
well, why not? Exactly. Keeping in mind that, given that Barack Obama, made the fact that he was a community organizer part of the appeal, part of the introduction to him as part of the public, it's more than reasonable from a political standpoint to go after him on that. I mean, I don't think that's a racially thinly or thickly designed racial attack at all. They are critiquing him for what he sees as a large aspect of his resume.
They're attacking his experiences, in other words.
Well, it's one of the experiences he has that he points to. So it's more than reasonable to go after him on that. Just as it's reasonable for them to go after him on Reverend Wright or Bill Ayers, and people can go after McCain on Keating 5. It's all part of the entire package when a campaign's going on.
One of the, obviously, Obama being the first African-American major party candidate is riding a tide of history that could sink him or carry him, or could be irrelevant. I guess the question has to do with
never irrelevant.
Well, I guess the question is there a Bradley?
I think everybody
Explain what the Bradley effect is, and is there a Bradley effect in play?
Well, in 1982, Bradley was running for mayor.
No, he was running for governor.
Yeah, he was the former Los Angeles governor.
African-American mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley.
Running for governor.
And it also happened to David Dinkins when he ran for mayor a few years later.
And Doug Wilder for governor in Virginia.
Right.
And Lee Brown.
In the 80s, it was a very common factor. Of course, in the 1980s, everybody in the electorate was born before World War II. They grew up in a totally different culture. Nobody who was born after the Civil Rights era, after the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act passed, was yet in the electorate. They were just becoming 17 and 18 at the time. Yeah. A lot of people at that time voted racially, and they lied about it in polling. Polling that was coming up before the elections in multiple polls, in multiple elections, would show 10, 12, 14-point differences between the polling and even the exit polling and the election results.
In other words, white Democrats didn't want to tell pollsters they weren't going to vote for the black candidate.
Well, it's not just. I mean, I think it's fair to say it was all voters in the context of the general election. I think, though, I don't quite remember the name of the person who just recently did this study. It was on one of the political blogs, Mark Ambinder's political blog. Yeah. But this person, this professor, makes the argument that the so-called Bradley or Wilder effect, however you want to call it, was significant in the 80s and maybe up until, say, 1996. In 1996, though, you had significant legislation going on across the country involving both welfare reform and crime. And rightly or wrongly, those were issues that the broader electorate often associated with minorities. when crime started to go down and welfare was reformed, those kind of those policies which tended to racialize politics were removed, and so now there's this open question as to whether that effect is still going to be in play.
Well, it may not be in play as much as 10 or 12 points, but when you're at like a dead heat election right now, if it plays 2 to 5 points, that could be the whole ball game. I mean, and I think it certainly does exist, especially in certain battleground states.
Well, I agree.
Pennsylvania could be very significant.
But let's look what happened in the primary. When you look at what the polls were saying in Ohio, what they were saying in Pennsylvania, what they were saying in Texas, I think the Bradley effect is very much alive. In fact, if you look at the Stanford poll that just came out late last week, where it talked about 30% of Democrats or something along those lines of hard Democrats say that race is still a problem for them in voting for Barack Obama. So to think that the Bradley effect does not exist,
and there's another poll that just came out that said that since Hillary Clinton left the race in June, the percentage of Hillary voters who say they are going to vote for Obama hasn't changed. It was 58% when she left, and it's still 58%. Whether that's race, I don't know.
It's not 58.
But when you look at this particular candidate, I think it also comes into play. You have someone with a different name that people have never heard of, Barack Obama. It sounds foreign. He hasn't been able to really define himself. People still don't know his story and where he comes from.
You're talking about an electorate as a whole body that acts the same, and it's not like that.
But I'm just saying...
The reason why the Bradley effect is different now than it was in the 80s is that there are fewer people born before World War II still in the electorate. You've had a quarter of a century of people literally dying off and dropping out of the electorate.
But Susan's saying it's a greater factor than just race.
It's not just race. There's a lot of other things. It's the exoticness and other things.
You've got a gigantic portion of the electorate that's been born since the voting rights and civil rights bills became law. And you only have about a third of the electorate in that old Bradley category. Plus, you've got a different, which would make it, if it was 12% before, it would make it only 4% now. And you have another factor. People are not quite as unwilling to answer in a poll that they'd be willing to vote against Obama. So it's pretty much factored in. You're right, in some states, Kevin was mentioning that in some places, the T in Pennsylvania and in Ohio and places like Florida, it's going to be more of a factor than younger states like New Mexico, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina,
Colorado,
Virginia. Some of these states, you're not going to have it as an effect at all. It's totally discounted, and it's pretty much gone away.
But the election's going to be decided in Ohio, in Florida, in Pennsylvania.
Florida, it's amazing that Florida is even competitive. Ohio is going to go Democratic.
The people I talk to in Florida actually think that, especially with a high population of elderly voters who feel their age are not attracted to McCain as an older candidate because he is older.
But the problem is, though, that kind of cuts both ways. On the one hand, you might have some older people who say, look, I'm not driving my car that very well. I'm not sure if I want somebody my age running the country. But those older voters, which are also the most reliable voters, are also the ones, speaking to Joe's point, that would be the most likely to have some of the older racist or racial feelings. Add to that, there are a number of polling numbers that show that Jewish voters are not completely taken by Barack Obama, whether it's because of race or Arab's middle name or whatever. So, and those are very significant voting blocks in Florida, which may be contributing to that issue.
You also have another factor. You've got some states that have as many as 1 million more voters, who are mostly young voters, that have registered since the last presidential election. In Ohio, you have 100,000 new young voters who registered since the primary. None of these people are really being covered adequately in the polling.
But Obama lost Ohio by 10 points. By 10
primary, it has nothing to do with it.
It's
totally irrelevant.
But also, these people have to show. And we always make the argument.
All the current polling you have from the battleground states is all polling that was taken during the bounce. And Obama was ahead in most of the states, even with the post-convention Republican bounce.
But you know what,
now,
Joseph,
after the
there's also a
economic
voter
stuff,
fatigue.
all the polling that's going to come down in the next week is going to show much bigger margins for Obama.
But when you had all these young people coming out for Obama, and they were registering, and people, it's absolutely true, and we've heard the story so many times before in presidential elections. That was still beginning 18 months ago, and I think there is some election fatigue going on. Obama is not the new, fresh face of change. He's been around for 18 months. Ask Hillary Clinton how it worked out for her after she had been around for a long period of time.
His voters are so worn out, they donated $66 million.
And no, they're not necessarily from the cities.
18 months is very different than 18 years, which is
yes,
what
I don't disagree, but I'm just saying
on.
until we can't necessarily say that they're going to be there to make that difference for him. It's just
it's an
hasn't been proven.
argument.
Now
the level of donations on the internet, the level of activity. The number,
and they say that every 4 years, Joseph. The Democrats say every 4 years.
Kerry had 30 people working field operations in Ohio. Obama has 300 working.
Kerry had more than 30. I'm sorry, I was there. He had more than 30 working in Ohio. We had almost 30 offices in Ohio. It wasn't one person per office.
He may have had more. He may have had more than 30 employed there, but there may have only been 30 working.
Now this is very much an insider comment in the sense that I think we watch this campaign a lot more closely than people who have normal lives do.
I represent that remark.
But I mean, McCain again trying to because obviously Obama is a more interesting phenomenon, but the McCain age phenomenon. I just want to focus on that a little bit more. The man has had a series of stumbles, things that certainly get attention in the blog. He talked about Czechoslovakia; it hasn't existed in 17 years. The idea that he doesn't know how to send an email that he said when he said about the economy. I think that's kind of it's a bit of a cheap shot. It was part of a broader interview, but he had the Pakistan-Iraq border, which of course has Iran in between it. I mean, he's had he confused the Shia and the Shiites.
Not in a McCain administration. Iran would not be in the middle.
Maybe he'll take out Iran. So I mean, now I don't know if this reaches out to the broader populace.
All of that happens, and yet we see, for example, New York at a 5-point spread. Now I don't think that
that's Siena, and that's a horrible poll.
I don't think
and it was during the convention bounce.
But not only that, look at Siena over
like,
time. Siena is the only poll in all of New York State where there's 17-20% undecided in New York. Is there anybody in this audience that's undecided in New York?
All I'm saying is that when you start seeing some of these polls,
and that's the only poll that has such a high undecided.
How are they still virtually in a dead heat? Everyone knows that Republicans are running so
First of all, they're not in a dead heat.
A
national poll.
Obama 2 days ago was at 50 again.
And now he's back down to 46. It depends what you read.
Tracking polls.
First of all, stop paying attention to national polls. They don't mean anything. National polls are garbage.
You know what? They're not, though, because
I'd rather
swing.
lose a national poll and win Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania and be president.
That's
lose the national
That's why George Bush is president.
Based on 2000, we'll agree with you on that.
But you know what? The poll number may be wrong, but what it does is it makes headlines. It gets people to raise money. It has an effect on the public. It may not be right, but it certainly goes into play.
And I think it just revs up Obama's supporters in a real sense by giving $66 million in August because the numbers were so close. And I think it makes them more concerned. I think I've been traveling around the country training field organizers for Camp Obama, for Senator Obama. And I walk in these rooms and 200, 300 folks who have never been involved in politics come in to be trained on how to do voter contact, and they're donating 5 weeks of their lives, these individuals, to not be paid to go into these offices. I've never seen anything quite like it. Now, whether they'll be effective or not, we're going to argue about that come November.
No, it's already
December.
a win. It's a great thing.
But it's unbelievable when I walk into a room in Philadelphia and 300 people who had never been involved, not part of party apparatus, not part of structures, they just want to be trained on how to do this, given an assignment, and then they take 5 weeks of their vacation and run off to Ohio, to Pennsylvania, to Florida, to other places to work on half of the campaign. And that's happening all across the country.
But that's tremendous to get that
The other-
involved.
It
That's
is.
a great
It
thing.
is. And I think these polls make more of these people show up the closer it is. It may not be benefiting John McCain
Yeah,
as
but-
much
Well,
as
it is
might.
interesting. We were
It
talking
is
about,
because people are still surprised McCain's in there.
We were talking about the Palin impact earlier on, and it is interesting that that Palin had this galvanizing effect on both sides. She came in, and within 48 hours of her being announced, the McCain campaign announced $8 or $9 million raised. Within about 5 days to a week after that, the Obama camp announced they had also raised $10 million because the Democrats suddenly saw that the Republicans were energized by this new figure, and that is the interesting variable in this entire campaign. Because you have this is really the pure internet election, because something can happen immediately that will change the dynamic, and the campaigns then immediately turn to their supporters and say, look, this is what's happening. We need to raise money right away. The Obama people mastered that early, but the McCain people have caught up really quickly, and that's why it's so hard to predict what's going to be happening.
Let me kind of a corollary to the or an opposite question to the Bradley effect, and I think we've discussed this before, is the cell phone effect. Is these young people who use cell phones, are they being polled? So could the polling numbers actually understate McCain's support?
Well, actually, some of the polls are oversampling with cell phones, and they're coming up with no
difference?
No difference.
Zogby just wrote an article in Campaigns and Elections last month about the cell phone issue and the fact that most pollsters are going to not involve cell phones as part of their.
There are actually problems with
there's lots
cell
of
phones.
problems to use a cell
Well,
phone.
but the question
and
is
the
you have
numbers
a
don't change
significant
that
percentage
dramatically.
of young people in particular who don't have landlines.
Well, yeah, but there are the people who have landlines and the people who don't, and they're doing testing on it, and there isn't a problem.
Yes.
One thing, though, I know the Obama people want to lowball everything, that things are close, and but consistently all summer and now, except for the post-convention bounce weeks, the truth is that Obama's been running mid to high 40s, and McCain has been running mid to low 40s all summer and now. And the Bradley effect, if it exists at all, only exists in certain geography. Obama's been running ahead in most battleground states that he needs, and in some that one wouldn't expect him to be getting. And we still have 8 weeks to go, and all of a sudden we've got this economic problem dumped on us, and McCain is the guy who said he doesn't know much about the economy. It's not his strong suit.
But one thing I would have to disagree with you. I mean, before you said that the Bradley effect is, it's geographical, but the three cases we've seen.
It's also not 12% anymore. It's maybe 3%.
Yeah, I know, but the three cases we saw were California, Virginia, and New York. So I mean that suggests those are both conservative and geographic
and urban areas. If you're born in Virginia, the Bradley effect has a totally different meaning
the Siena poll is
electorally. I mean.
They're all. If he was actually that close in New Jersey and in New York, you'd start having Republicans screaming about how he's got to put money into New Jersey and New York, and since he doesn't have all that much money by comparison to Obama, since he's in financing.
But actually, that's not true. What we found out just a couple.
It's a totally bogus story to talk about the Palin fundraising that came on the internet, since he's in campaign financing and can't use money. It's RNC money.
But there was
the
story that just came out this week that when you combine Obama's the money that Obama has on hand with the amount that the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has on hand, you take that lump plus what McCain has and what the RNC has. Obama has only $1 million more than McCain.
And he's been spending significantly more on voter registration, field operations, training. You heard Kevin talking about going around the country, training local people. This is going to be a very heavy-duty.
I know, but I'm talking about cash. I'm talking about cash on hand.
That story is also,
and
what you just
that's
said is also not accurate, because when you add the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee and you add the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they have more than twice lapped the Republicans on both the RNC, the Senate Republicans, and the Democratic Republicans.
Has to go. That money
and the
goes
RNC
to,
money has to go to congressional candidates and Senate candidates.
The Senate and Congressional committees obviously go into those campaigns. I'm talking about the party money that they can pay on behalf of their nominee.
Yeah, but
yes,
they
but the
can't do an
RNC has to help its
campaign.
congressional members.
They
Don't
can,
forget
they can
that.
Do only,
That's what,
they
because
can only do party building kinds of work. They're not going to be running McCain-only advertising campaigns with that money.
No, they're allowed to. What they're able to do, though, and this gets into a little bit more technical stuff. They are allowed to run. They are allowed to run ads, encouraging people to vote for, say, the Republican ticket, which would be McCain and whoever the local person is running.
You're grabbing at straws. If Obama raised $66 million in August when things weren't going well, you could imagine that in September and October he's going to raise.
So then why aren't the Obama people just dancing around? According to you, they should be. It's like they're 60% ahead, Joseph. I mean, there is some serious concerns that the Obama people have. Frankly, the McCain people are still somewhat shocked they're doing as well.
He had 4 days.
But you know what?
At 50%. And there are multiple candidates.
You know what? Then
in the
they should
race.
all pack it up and go home, according to you, because they won it. They're done. It's a done deal. Everything you've said. They have all the money. They have all the field ups. They have all the states locked up. It's not that simple.
Position than McCain is in.
Look, the reality is
we live in a contested election.
We live in a 49-49 country. I mean, look at the last three presidential elections very closely. We live in a very close country, and no, they should not be dancing. They should be working even harder than they worked yesterday. Look,
I'd be happy if they took off.
I think clearly. Look, I think one of two things happens in November, right? I think Barack Obama gets 290 electoral votes and walks away with this thing, or he gets 255 and loses. I don't think there's in between. This is not going to be a one electoral vote election. He's either going to walk away with it because of everything that's happening, the economy, the background, McCain and being out of touch, all those issues, or McCain and his base are going to pull it together at the end like they always do, and there'll be some voter protection and integrity issues across the country because of the long lines and other things that are going on, and they'll win slightly. It's going to be one or the other. It's not going to be one electoral vote difference. I honestly don't.
We've talked about the Bradley effect. What we haven't talked about is the fact that the McCain campaign is brazenly doing race-based commercials.
In what sense?
In what sense?
He's doing commercials that play on race.
I know what that means, but could you give me an example?
Well, yeah, he's had several commercials that emphasized the fact that, oh, by the way, he's a black candidate.
Could you give me one?
If you look at the commercial that, I mean, they're almost Saturday night skits. Some of them.
Just give me one, Joe.
They did a commercial the other day that described him and other elected officials who were black who've done things wrong, and they quoted people. They've done several commercials.
Versus the Obama people who put him up with McCain with George W. Bush. I mean,
the leader of his party.
Anyone voted with George Bush 95% of the time, and the White House. You should be with George.
95% of the time.
The only one I can think of two commercials. One which had to do with the Franklin Raines and the Fannie Mae, which is certainly fair, because they also had another commercial involving Jim Johnson, who happens to be white and is also
did that
connected
commercial with his own campaign manager being the lobbyist for Fannie Mae.
But what I'm saying is that's a completely legitimate one. The one involving the
so
one.
I'm correct that he's doing race-based.
Let him finish.
No, that is not a race-based. Look, Franklin Raines was the former head of Fannie Mae.
And what's the connection with Obama?
The Washington Post described Franklin Raines as an advisor to the Obama campaign.
And Franklin Raines says no, and there is no evidence that he was. While McCain's campaign manager was paid $2 million by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as a lobbyist.
And that's completely legitimate. It's completely legitimate for Obama people to run an ad. What I'm saying is it was a legitimate ad, and to say that it was a race-based ad, I think, is unfair.
What about the Kwame Kilpatrick ad?
That was not a McCain ad. That was a
RNC
local
ad?
No, it was a state party ad. It was a Michigan.
Which
What do you think, though, about the?
I didn't see it. But
What about
believe he
the
denounced it.
Obama ads? The he doesn't get it ads. The doesn't know how to. They did an email. They did a commercial that said he doesn't know how to do email. Is that an age? Is that an ageist?
It's fair game. I mean, I happen to think it's fair game.
I think it's
age baiting.
You know, I think it's
I think it's fair game, but I think it's unnecessary, to be honest with you. I think pointing out the fact that this man is the age he is, but looking at him, he is the age that he is. I don't think that's necessary. I think what we need to talk about is the fact
looking
that
at Barack Obama, you can see the race that he is.
between the two of them.
I think the more obvious. I think we should talk about what he believed and what he would do in the White House in comparison to Barack Obama.
I think the more obvious age ad was the one that came just before the conventions when the question of how many houses does McCain have, and the ad ran. McCain couldn't remember. He became confused,
right.
and the camera kind of jerks. That was very clearly an age.
Although he was confused when they asked him the question. I mean, all due respect.
I do want to ask. Let me ask one question before we go to questions from the students. You made reference before to things, Robert, the things that change the dynamic of the campaign. If the financial implosion doesn't change the dynamic of the country, let alone the campaign, then nothing ever will. I mean, does the demands of the economy totally suppress these kinds of identity issues? And I say this with the knowledge that right out of the bat, while this is going on, McCain comes out with an ad talking about William Ayers, who was a weatherman in the 1970s, I guess, as Barack Obama points out, when he was 8 years old, why he's being linked to something that happened when he was 8 years old. And they link him also to Reverend Wright. So, at a time of this economic
when he was
implosion,
35 years old.
No, Reverend Wright is obviously a lot closer, personal link. But the question is, with the financial implosion, does that drown out a lot of what we're talking about?
Well, it could. I mean, if it gets really bad, and I know, and it's bad now, but if it gets to the point where it really just, the bottom falls out, and you start hearing a lot of talk of how it affects the international markets, and it becomes more of a foreign policy issue because you're going to have a lot of people talking about how it affects this market, that market, what China's going to do, etc. It does fall to the advantage of McCain, because people don't want to take too much risk on that young, hopeful way. They feel like at that point they want to command it.
Wait. I disagree. I totally disagree.
I say not now. If it gets,
I think if it gets worse. I mean, look at there was a story in the Times a few days ago about how food pantries in this country are suffering. That they're getting less money from restaurants because the restaurants themselves don't have extra food to give away because they're not selling as much, not getting as much customers. When people can't eat and then they're getting unemployed at higher levels, when they're suffering in their homes, I think they turn to something new. I think they're going to turn to Barack Obama. And I think that a lot of these other issues, they're going to want someone who cares about them, looks like them, and can bring real change to this country. And that's what Barack Obama's been talking about since day one. And I think as it gets worse, it turns to him, not to John McCain. It doesn't stay more of the same. It says change.
I would disagree with Susan in the sense that if it becomes more of an international market foreign policy, people are going to necessarily turn to McCain. However, I do think, though, there is this. If this becomes a real crisis, it is a real crisis. It's a financial market crisis right now.
It's a crisis in people's homes.
It's also a Main Street crisis.
If it becomes a complete and total meltdown, which it is not quite as of yet.
In Florida, there's a 2-year backlog in unsold homes.
The question, though, is, do they go at that point? Do they take, in a sense, a calculated risk that the new guy is going to be the one that has the vision and the energy to take care of all that's going on here, or do they say, there's so much chaos going on here, I want to stick to the tried and true, even though I'm not so sure about it, which might lean them towards McCain. And I think it's a really tough
Voters are smart enough to know you're not just electing a president, you're electing a whole government. And when you look at, Robert Rubin and Paul Volcker on the one side, and you look at Dick Cheney and Sarah on the other side, and the guys who, did the SNL. I mean, McCain is one of the Keating Five from the SNL scandal in the 80s.
I know, I brought that up earlier.
He's, these are the guys. He was the chairman of the Commerce Committee. I mean, a lot of the unraveling over the last 30 years of the controls on the markets and the business community happened in his
But the
committee.
young voters you mentioned
mortgage
never heard
stuff,
the
though,
Keating
the mortgage
Five.
stuff though went on during the Clinton. The mortgage things started
A lot
to
of the deregulation happened
under Clinton.
But let's be clear, right? Let's be
You won't get
clear.
blamed.
The
I mean-
definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. They voted Republican 4 years ago. They voted Republican 8 years before that. They're not going the same way if this economic crisis continues to get worse. It's that simple.
Let me stop for a question. Tell us your name and the campus you're from, and speak up, please.
Yes, hello, how you doing? My name is Keston Boyce, and I'm from Medgar Evers College. My question to the panelists is, why when you hear about the presidential election, you don't really hear Joe Biden's name mentioned when you talk about
Joe who? Sorry, right? I'm sorry.
You walked right into that.
When you talk about the Republicans, you hear John McCain and you hear Sarah Palin, and when you talk about the Democrats, you only people only speak about Barack Obama. So does that mean Joe Biden is not that effective?
No, I mean, well, frankly, as
They
somebody
don't like
who was
white guys from Delaware.
somebody who was a reporter for 21 years, it's a fairly simple answer in the sense of what's new is what's news is what's new, and she certainly is the new face.
Or it could be
I
the
mean,
super
I think
glue he put right next to her
Well, no, I
shoulder.
do think that what Biden, I think what
connected.
Biden did for Obama is, Obama had to make a safe pick, and McCain had to roll the dice. I mean, so you had two different imperatives in how they were trying to reach out. So I think that because of all the uncertainties, as well as what I think Susan was talking about, when it wasn't necessarily race but his name and stuff, is that there's this question of the other, that he's viewed as the other, that it was a reassuring pick, because whatever you want to say about Sarah Palin, I don't think there's any question that within this field, Joe Biden can step in and be president.
thing
We
is,
may not want to listen to him for 4 years, but the man is qualified to step in and be president.
There are times, though, it's sometimes a good thing that you didn't hear too much about Biden, because he opened his mouth in the last couple of days, and there were a couple of embarrassments because he said something different about the AIG, the big insurance bailout, than Obama said, and then on top of that, today he said that when the stock market crashed in 1929, President Roosevelt addressed the country on television, which was interesting because Roosevelt wasn't president.
But let me give the answer that the Medgar Evers College student really wanted to hear. He chose wrong. He should have chose Hillary Clinton, and this election would be over. It's that simple. I have the unpopular position of that, but I believe if he had chosen Hillary Clinton, this election would be over. As a Clinton supporter in the primary, absolutely.
I'm not an Obama. Obviously, I'm not an Obama supporter. I think
You're not, Robert?
based on how he was, the kind of campaign he was running and talking about, turning away from the Bush-Clinton years. I don't know how he could have.
You don't pick. You can't say you can't run a change campaign and pick someone who's been in office for 36 years. It's not based on. It's not based on. It wasn't Bush versus Clinton.
Biden's media team in the primary, I'd like to say it's interesting that since
He had a media team?
Since Biden was picked, the entire conversation about foreign policy and whether there was a big difference between the Democrat and the Republican on foreign policy seems to have evaporated.
I'm sorry, when McCain picked Palin, it evaporated. It not when Obama picked Biden.
No, it started the week before.
No, I'm sorry.
I agree.
The artificial conversation about Sarah being somebody who would get Hillary voters, people who are diametrically opposed to her and McCain. I mean, McCain is unequivocally opposed to a woman's right to choose, voted against every conceivable thing
So
that
Palin.
a woman.
Palin is pro-life too.
More so, the team is totally against right to work laws, minimum wage laws, maternity leave, equal
Right
pay
to
for
organize.
equal work, right to organize. anything that women would want, extra funding for education, health care, you name it. We don't even have to talk about creationism and censoring books. You name it, women who would be voting for Hillary Clinton would be diametrically opposed to it was just a conversation to confuse the conversation.
Let me just raise.
All she was doing was fixing him up with
that.
his base in the conservative side of the party,
Which is a different kind of identity
with
politics as well.
evangelicals.
Let me raise one other point growing off of this discussion of whether he should have picked Hillary Clinton, which is we're talking about identity politics. About you had a Democratic race between a woman who was somebody who was potentially the first female presidential nominee and someone who became the first African American nominee. And I've always believed that there was a Clinton fatigue, and I was a Hillary Clinton supporter. And that ultimately the way the primary played out, and I believe is a very important factor in the general, is it is also a generational election. And that's the John Kennedy election of 1960 is the generational issue. And I do believe that that is a tremendous ace in the hole for Obama. That doesn't necessarily, I don't know that that's been asked.
Well, what I think is, actually, I wrote about this actually for the Root.com online, and what is interesting is that in both McCain and because of McCain being nominated by the Republicans and Obama being nominated by the Democrats, you have the parties basically essentially rejecting the baby boomer generation, which of course Hillary was, Bush is, Bill Clinton.
Actually,
Bill Clinton
Obama is a baby boomer.
Well, it actually depends. It depends.
At the end of the baby boomer.
Very, very tail end.
Right.
But his appeal and the type of campaign he's running is very anti-boomer. So I think the underwritten story has been how there has been something of a rejection of what has been 16 really contentious years of baby boomer driven driven.
It was also a rejection of parties, let's face it, but there was a party rejection on both sides too. It was Hillary Clinton and anyone but John McCain. So
that's very interesting.
Get ready because millennials are a bigger group in the population than the baby boom was.
And
Obama's
gone
come
after
into the
them.
electorate. And that's
I always
part
felt that the baby boom really were people who grew up in the shadow of World War II. And by the time he came along, that shadow was quite distant in the past. I mean, I was born in 1949.
It's also whether you remember
I
the
grew up
Kennedy
with
assassination
with
or not.
parents who had, lived the awareness of the Depression and of World War II and being Jewish, living the Holocaust.
People think
things you grew up around
the way you just
as a
described
consciousness
McCain
builder.
as if McCain was a World War II veteran. McCain was a Vietnam War veteran.
Yes,
So
but he also grew up in a military family.
Well, yeah.
And he was an older Vietnam War veteran too.
Maybe the difference is he spent a lot of the 60s in a prisoner of war camp.
Yes. Yes. Let me go. Tell us your name and the campus you're from.
Yes, good afternoon, panelists. My question is my name is Sandra May Flowers from Hostess College, and my question is directed to Mr. Mercurio. You said that the elderly have more racial feelings than others. Do you think that they will vote in good conscience with the problems that we're having today based on race, rather than not weigh both candidates' positions and their policies?
I think there's a small percentage still of older voters, people who were born before World War II, basically, who are more conscious of color, and some of them, in addition, will lie to pollsters. The younger voters born after the Civil Rights era, are much more colorblind by comparison. Depending on what the size of the electorate is, how many young people come out, which states are in play in the final analysis, how big the margins are in the final analysis, it could be a factor in the election.
It's also
Some voters vote on race. African American voters are voting on race also, but it's favorite son. It would be like what happens in our society. If you look at when Mario Cuomo ran for governor of New York, my father was delighted, and his father had been an immigrant. He was delighted that an Italian was finally running for a high office. When his son was running for governor, all my nieces and nephews were very ho-hum about it. For African Americans, it's a big deal, favorite son that Obama's running.
But just think about in 8 years, if Obama is president for 8 years, how it changes the racial debate, that it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder to make an argument. It kind of changes the entire racial debate.
It absolutely does.
But the funny thing is, though, the racial dynamic in terms of the favorite son question was significant in the context of the Democratic primary. It's not significant in the context of the general election because
It absolutely
is.
You have phenomenal registration
and the point
And
is,
there'll be
150,000 new registered voters in Georgia.
Barack Obama will change the percentages of blacks voting for the Democratic ticket from about 92% to about 95%, because African Americans in general elections at the presidential level vote Democrat.
But you're going to get a
gonna be a lot more.
larger.
No,
It's going to be a lot more.
It's a larger.
The turnout is the issue here, not just the percentage.
It's a larger. It will most likely. Does anybody know which Democratic candidate got the largest percentage of the black vote? Anybody know?
Probably Lyndon Johnson.
Johnson, right? Sorry, Johnson was 96%. In the last 20 years, the person who got the largest percentage was Al Gore, and in terms of pure numbers, he got the largest numbers of African American voters.
Well, he got the most votes of anybody in the history of the country, even if he lost the election.
But there's significantly more. There is significantly more African Americans in the electorate now. And McCain is getting less than 4%.
150,000 new registered African Americans in Georgia alone is not something to sneeze at, especially if their turnout numbers are higher.
The turnout, that's what you're going to see. The percentage
Let me go
is going to be there.
another question. Sorry.
Boris Noble, I'm Brooklyn College, graduate student. I actually intern at a community nonprofit, and I see the housing crisis up front. I have a front row seat to it, and I've actually begun to think about it. And I've actually thought about that the Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and the Community Reinvestment Act actually encourage predatory lending that both candidates, but in particular the Democratic nominee, talks about. Would you say that the government actually made predatory lending a practice that's legal?
It's kind of it's a question. Did deregulation lift the kinds of controls that would have kept it from happening?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I can't say for sure whether it enabled predatory lending, but there was a lot less oversight of the Freddie and the Fannies starting in the mid 90s, and it was bipartisan. You know, when Republicans introduced the bills, Bill Clinton passed them, and so forth, and so that has certainly enhanced the problem. And frankly, the other bipartisan problem you had was the deregulating of bankruptcy laws, which, you know, Republicans introduced them, and Democrats in large numbers also supported them as well. And so that's kind of what we got.
The bankruptcy changes to the bankruptcy bill happened on George Bush's watch, not in Bill Clinton's watch.
No, but when I say bipartisan, I mean people, big Democrats like Chris Dodd, Joe Biden were strong supporters of those bankruptcy deregulation.
I just want to try to get a few more questions in. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Christina Rodriguez, and I'm from Queens College. Most people speak about the disconnect between white and black voters, and I was just curious to see if I haven't heard that much about Hispanic voters. Do you think they would really make the difference in this election?
Yeah, I think Hispanic voters are going to be more for the Democratic candidate this time than before. There's some misconceptions about how much Bush was getting of Hispanic voters. He got a higher percentage of Hispanic voters than prior Republicans have gotten. One of the reasons is he did phenomenally well among evangelical voters. And people forget that 20% of Hispanic voters are evangelicals. And he got 95, 98% of Hispanic evangelicals, which boosted his number substantially among Hispanics overall. McCain, of course, you know, now he's got Sarah on the ticket with him, before the convention, he wasn't doing very well with evangelicals, and people were expecting the turnout among evangelicals to be lower than it was last time. I don't think it's going to carry over to Hispanic evangelicals the way it did for Bush, so I think it'll be lower.
Two quick things to keep in mind. Just as there have been a larger number of African Americans registered, there's been a larger number of Hispanics also registered. Many of them got very upset with the way the Republican Party handled the immigration issue, and so there's a backlash there that may rebound to Obama, particularly in states like Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, under normal circumstances, but not with McCain in there. But the other point is, though, John McCain is the Republican who was the most comprehensive immigration reform Republican that was running. Arguably, his stance on immigration actually helped him win Florida because of the Cuban influence there. So, if there was to be a Republican running who has a good message to say to Latino voters, McCain is it. Whether it will work in the broader atmosphere, I don't know.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Daphne Burnett. I'm from Brooklyn College. I just wanted to say, first of all, as naive as it might sound, I really do believe Obama could be the best thing that could happen to this country right now. And in that spirit, excellent choice of photographs in the back. And my question is, what really bothered me about as a woman, I felt almost like if I was a Republican, I would have felt slapped in the face by the nomination of Sarah Palin as a running mate, because it's just basically saying, oh, just put any woman up there and you women will be happy. So I felt it almost insulted the intelligence of the voters. But on the same note, I feel the Democratic campaign, by focusing on such superficial issues like age and computer savviness rather than on individual individual and party policies, like you were mentioning about the rights to vote and unemployment and minimum wage things. Instead of focusing on those in the commercials, they focus on superficial things, and it's kind of an insult to the intelligence of the voters. So I wonder why the Democrats take the same path as the Republicans on that.
Mr. Democrat.
I was, as the one person up here who said they thought that the age thing did not matter, I thought that it was silly to go in that way. I totally agree with you. They probably went that way because polling said to do so. Or they felt that because of some of the things that John McCain had said, they felt that that was the way to respond. I think you're right, and I think hopefully many folks involved in the campaign hopefully will push them back in the right direction. It's the issues. It's about abortion. It's about health care. It's about economy. It's about a lot of issues where I believe the Democrats have a better stance to stand on. Even the polling says folks trust Obama more in the economy than they trust McCain. I think we need to get back to that. You're absolutely right, and I wish we had never done that.
Okay, I'm going to take, we have about 5 minutes left. Sir, you have a question?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Carlos Favara from Brooklyn College. And my question is, if the Electoral College is the body of men, I think it's 535 individuals who elect the president.
Men and women.
Who really elect the president. Why do Americans invest so much time and so much money and so much emotion, I guess, into the electoral campaign? I mean, that's my question.
Because that's the way you win elections in this country. If you win the state, you win the country.
I was once the presidential elector for the 1st congressional district in Seattle. I ran a campaign, and I said that I went to Brooklyn College and I went to Rutgers College, and now I want to be in the Electoral College. I mean, how do you run for and of course, then we lost the state. That was during Jimmy Carter.
Thanks, Bob.
See, we don't have a national election. We have a state-by-state election.
Exactly.
And that's what reflects the electoral college.
I've always believed that the Electoral College would be better served by having one electoral vote per congressional district, and then and then you can give two more. Then you can give 2 more for whoever wins the state, so that you wouldn't have these flyover states. Everybody's vote would be worth the same.
You get 1 for each congressional district and 1 for each senator.
And 1 for each senator. Yes.
That small states have 1 congressional district, even though they're tiny.
That's correct.
It's awarded by congressional district network.
No, it's now there are 2.
Yeah,
there's one.
But small states are worth a lot more than big states.
There are 2 states, so Maine and Nebraska, are the only ones that do congressional.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So I think the entire country. I've always believed this on the Electoral College, but I also am against the metric system, so that's a whole.
But people
that's a whole
generally care
different
because
matter.
it's democracy and they want to be part of a system. I mean,
that's a
that's why
measured
people get
response.
invested in it, to answer the question. I mean, there's this all of the electoral math and how it really happens, but I think the question was, why do we even bother then if it's just going to be towards them? Because
no, it
people
does
have an
raise the
innate
question.
being of
It
being
does raise the-
democratic.
20 states, however.
It does
We
raise the
don't- we don't
question,
bother
though,
with the whole
as a
country.
as a practical matter of what's called the faithless elector. That if Jimmy Carter won Washington State in 1976, I was going to vote for my mother for vice president. I was going to vote because you have no checks. It's very unclear whether you are legally bound to vote for who wins your state. So it is as a technical matter, it actually is a very interesting question.
It's the rules. But before we leave, folks need to be reminded of one thing. Regardless of race, regardless of whatever, let's remember one quick thing. On November 4th, go to vote at 6 a.m. in the morning, please. And the reason why is if you're reading close to papers, the Board of Elections was denied $31 million here in New York that they were asked for so they could put extra machines and extra workers at the polls. They expect lines of 2 hours or more at your local polling place. And if you look at February 5th, even if you look at each district, they doubled their vote in the primary. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of new voters in the city of New York with less people to work it, new machines in place and new rules. So if you're here and you're listening to this or you're sitting here in this room, go vote at 6 a.m. on November 4th. Go vote at 7 a.m. Don't wait till you come home because you can wait 5 hours to vote.
As
So
somebody from
pay
Brooklyn,
attention to it.
As somebody from Brooklyn, you should vote at 6 o'clock in Brooklyn, at 7 o'clock in at 8 o'clock in Queens.
When did we move to Chicago?
Vote for the first time at 6.
We may all be living in Chicago soon. Who knows?
We only have a minute left. So this has to be quick answers. Is the function of identity less important today than it was 4 years ago, 8 years ago, even in the face of having people who are, embody identity issues?
I think it's important to look at identity in a broader sense. I mean, immediately people think I'm going to vote for the guy the person that looks like me, but it's a lot of things. I think it's this is how the person looks, age, gender, and we all have a combination of factors that that affect us when we go in and vote.
I'll be quick.
Quickly.
It matters. It still matters. It's just as important.
It matters, and it's policy. A lot of times it's perception versus policy,
Absolutely.
and that's where we are. We're still there.
Well, I think that we're about out of time, and I want to thank you all. This was quite a spirited discussion, and we'll see you next month, assuming that the country still exists and the financial implosion take us all down.
Check local listings if the country still exists.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum.